Hey, Malcolm, you know that Audible's got a lot more than audiobooks?
Of course, podcasts,
Originals,
bestsellers,
future bestsellers,
sleep stories.
sleep story. What are you talking about, sleep story? Malcolm. Oh, wow. Malcolm. Malcolm. Hey, no, Roxy. Hey, Roxy, get out of Malcolm's house.
The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories, all in one place. Audible.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Gómez. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Arizona studying children's and young adult literature and the author of 3 books from Capstone Publishing. Thanks for tuning in to the 26th Annual Festival of Books and our virtual event, Young Adult Fiction, The Poetry of the Black Experience. I want to welcome Dean Atta, poet and author of the debut novel, The Black Flamingo, which is a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize in Young Adult Literature and is shortlisted for the Polari First Book Prize Award. Next, I have Morgan Parker, recipient of a 2017 National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship, winner of a 2016 Pushcart Prize, a Cave Canem graduate fellow and author, most recently of the YA novel Who Put This Song On? Finally, I have Dr. Yusef Salaam and Ibi Zoboi, who are co-authors of Punching the Air, which is also a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize in Young Adult Literature. Yusef is a prison reform activist, motivational speaker, and recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from President Barack Obama, among other honors. Ibi Zoboi is a best-selling, award-winning author of several books for middle grade and young adult readers and the editor of the anthology Black Enough. Before we get started, I want to remind viewers to support your local independent bookstore during the festival. Signed book plates from all of these authors are available with your book purchase from Once Upon a Time bookstore. Dean, Morgan, Yusef, and Ibi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Hi.
Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah.
So I want to start with the thing all authors love and hate to do, which is, can you tell us a bit about your books? So I'm going to start with Dean.
Okay, The Black Flamingo is a novel in verse. It's the coming-of-age story of Michael, a biracial boy growing up in London, coming out as gay at high school and then becoming a drag performer at university. And you get to see him kind of coming into his identity throughout the journey of the book.
And next, Morgan, can you tell us about Who Put This Song On?
So my book is about a fictional teen called Morgan Parker, who has just been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. She's one of the only Black students at a super conservative, religious, white, small town school. And she listens to punk music and wears Doc Martens and feels really out of place. And it's just a story about her learning to love herself and choosing herself.
Thank you. And Yusef and Ibi. Yusef, if you want to start, and then Ibi can chime in telling us about your co-written book.
Sure, absolutely. Punching the Air is really what I've described as a love offering for us and by us. It is a book about a young man's journey of finding value in one of the most darkest places of society. And it's very creative, very expressive. I love it, and I think you'll love it as well.
And I'll add that Punching the Air is inspired by 16-year-old Yusef. At 15, he was accused of sexually assaulting a woman in Central Park in 1989. While this book does not take place in 1989, it is a modern-day version of a young man falsely accused of a crime, and it is his inner journey, his spiritual journey, in terms of how he deals with incarceration and finding his voice and finding a way to express his truth to the world when he is deemed as a monster and as a criminal.
I feel weird smiling after that, like, hooray, that's so much fun. But it is a great book. I can attest to all 3 of these books being really phenomenal. So I was thinking we would do more of a roundtable type discussion. I think there are some things all 5 of us share and some things that you all share across your books as far as the Black experience. And I wanted to start talking about performance. So Morgan, in your book, the book Morgan gets kind of ragged on for acting white or listening to white music. And then we have Amal in Ibi and Yusuf's book, who has to watch people decide what he is. He's sitting there on trial and listening to people, describe what they think he's been performing as. And then, Dean, in your book, we have someone who literally is performing, who learns how to express himself through going on stage. So I think we probably all have a similar experience of having to check who we are before we leave the house, because no matter how much we are the stars of our own story in our head, the world has some, preconceived notions about what it's like to be a Black person or a mixed person who presents as, not fully white. So yeah, I'd love to just hear your thoughts on performance as a person of color in a white-centered world.
I think I'll start with oh, sorry about that. Just kind of jumping out there, and what I think about mostly is refusing to be defined by what the world wants you to be defined as. Knowing that you were born on purpose and with a purpose gives you a social reality that is very different than what the system wants you to be. Quite often, especially in the United States, you find that what they want you to be is a part of the modern day cotton fields of America, relegated to the prison industrial complex, when the fact that you were born on purpose means that you have something great to do. And so we have to learn to live as full a life as we can so that we could die empty.
Yeah. Dean, you wanted to add in something?
Yeah, well, I think the inspiration for the Black Flamingo came from a real life experience where I was visiting my family in Cyprus and saw a real Black flamingo in amongst a flock of pink flamingos. And that really spoke to me as someone who is biracial, mixed race. And, my family's from Cyprus and Jamaica, but I was brought up in the UK. And sometimes you don't know where you fit in. And you find yourself performing differently in different contexts, whether it's different countries, different members of your family, or at school or at home. And so, yeah, that really came into its own when I wrote Michael and thought about that kind of experience, whether he was knowingly or unknowingly performing or acting differently for different groups of people. And that comes through in, how he dresses, how he has his hair. He gets locks and then he cuts them. He learns to do drag performance by, putting on costume and makeup. And he's always aware of his Blackness and his queerness, but he knows that those things are read differently in different contexts. So that's a growing awareness that Michael gains throughout the book. But when he's young, he isn't aware of some of these things, and he has some kind of harsh moments where he has to become aware quickly. For example, when him and his uncle are profiled by the police and stopped in their car, and he doesn't realize why, and his uncle kind of explains the realities of the world to him. And I was happy to explore that in the book in a way where they weren't in like real jeopardy. Nothing terrible happens in that moment, I can assure people. But it is an awakening of like, this is the reality to be Black in this world.
I'm just going to add, performance is something that I write about all the time. And I write a lot of poems about performance and think about it a lot. And with this character, what I wanted to kind of bring together was all the different ways that she's performing. As a depressed person who doesn't want anyone to find out about her struggle, and as someone who's struggling with doubts about her faith, as someone who is Black, but is being told that she's not that Black, and deciphering what all those things mean, and what it means to be defined by what someone else calls you or what someone else diagnoses you with or sees you as. And really, it's just a story about reaching a limit where, you're just so exhausted and you just want to be. And it's a story about her trying to figure out how to do that, which I think is a lifelong journey of just like trying to figure out how to be as pure as you can and to resist whatever labels get slapped on you and what boxes you get fit into.
You know,
Do
when
any of you remember the first time you realized you were Black? I'm just thinking, like, the whole acting white thing. I'm like, I remember when my, predominantly, Latino and white school, someone, was like, look at that nappy afro. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, is that
I gotta say that I remember when I first found that I wasn't Black enough, as a Black immigrant from Haiti in New York City. I just didn't know certain cultural codes. And I looked the part. I looked like everybody else, but I had a funny name, and I didn't dress like everybody else, and I didn't know those girlhood games that we used to play on the streets. Even in high school, there were certain things that were different in my home life that my friends, my Black American friends, didn't do. So I never was in spaces where I'm just discovering that, oh, I'm Black. It was, okay, maybe I'm not Black American enough. And part of my work and part of how Yusef and I met in college was really accessing that sort of Blackness that I can connect with. And that is an African-centered Blackness, that sort of those cultural threads that connect each of us to the diaspora. And that's why I like to say I'm African-centered or Pan-African, because as a kid, I wasn't Black enough, but I was very African in my Haitian home life. And I'm like, what is this Blackness? If we're very African here and they're very African in their way, what are those cultural threads that are connecting all of us? And this is why I am who I am now. I can say I'm African centered because I see the Blackness in you is the Blackness in me, and is the Blackness in everyone in this panel and around the globe.
Yeah,
One thing about that, too, I love the way you said, what is this Blackness? Because I think that's the question. It's not, when I discovered I'm Black, it's like, wait, what is Blackness? Because I thought I'm Black, but you're telling me that it also has to do with what shoes I'm wearing and what I'm listening to. And I think that really is the distinction, right, between how you define your own Blackness and how you find acceptance within Blackness, and really to understand that it's up to us to create it and name it and embody it,
When I started
what's interesting about this conversation.
Oh, sorry, Dean.
No, go ahead, Dean. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I started doing spoken word poetry as a teenager, I found that initially I was writing about not wanting any labels, whether that was race, sexuality, or anything. But I kind of, through the scene, through meeting other poets, especially those that were kind of more Pan-African, I kind of learned to appreciate and understand like the importance of that kind of solidarity amongst Black people, especially when we're facing so much inequality and injustice. And then when I got to university, I got involved in the African and Caribbean Society because they ran the poetry nights on campus. And in my second year of university, I became the president of that society because I just loved everything they were doing. We had food nights and film nights. And it was such an education for me, beyond what I was learning in class, what I was learning with those peers in that club, basically. And I think that's really stuck with me, like finding a space where you can be with others that can share these experiences that you've been through or that you still have ahead of you, and they can help you prepare. So I think that kind of solidarity amongst Black people and people of color is really important. And so that's what I see in a lot of the work I do now, working with young people, working in writers' communities, that we do need those spaces to come together. And, despite our differences, like there are so many struggles that we face that white people aren't facing, that we can relate to and help each other with.
Yeah, that's so important. One of the things I was thinking about as this discussion was so to speak exposing a lot of the truths is that quite often we have to get to a point of acceptance, and that point of acceptance is realizing, in so to speak a Sankofa moment, that we've been running away from everything that we actually are. Everything that we created, everything came out of Blackness. And so the beauty of that expression is realizing that we have to accept ourselves and our own. We've been looking out of the window at life. And life has always reflected not us, but everyone else. And the beauty of it is that realizing that they want us to accept that as the truth, and that is not the truth. The truth is we have been disconnected from our truth, and now we are plugging back in. And plugging in gives us unmeasurable power that's always there and that's always been there. And there's beauty in that, and there's grace in that, right? And there's truth in that as well.
Mhm. I love that you mentioned Sankofa. I think so much about that return and get it, and return and get it, and learn from the past. And I really, a thread in my book is Morgan learning about Black history, not at school, but kind of having to do her own research in that way. And, a huge moment for her is realizing all the lies she's been told, and that her feelings about herself are built upon these lies, and all of those lies are creating these barriers in her life where they're false. She doesn't have to go along with that. There's a moment where she reads about Harriet Tubman and is like, Harriet Tubman carried a gun, and Rosa Parks wasn't just an old lady sitting on a bus. And that is empowering to me when all I've been told about myself and my people is slavery. There's a moment where she says, like, are Black people just quiet between civil rights and Obama? Like, what's going on? And why don't we learn?
Wow.
And why isn't there value? And it was really fun to write that, but it was also really painful because it's so true. And, I didn't have that awakening in high school, so it felt really urgent to write, and hard to kind of put that out there because I think it's true for a lot of us. And it's embarrassing, to not even know about yourself, but that's the system that we're in.
Wow.
Yeah, I definitely felt that reading your book. It was, because for people who haven't read it yet, it takes place, during Obama's first campaign. And I was thinking, like I was a few years older, but I was only like 20 when that happened. So definitely like reading about like Morgan listening to music and all that. And I was like, oh man, like I remember that album. I was listening to it too. And then, being like, I didn't learn all of that about Black history. Like,
yeah. I know, and it's disappointing, and but it's so true to life, and it's something that I find that I didn't talk to a lot of Black friends about as I got older, because again, then it's like I'm not Black enough. I didn't learn about this, I don't have access, and so I think usually it just manifests as shame, and bring in microaggressions and bring in depression and anxiety and, bring in people who are trying to tell you to pray your depression away. It's very overwhelming. And I think we just internalize all of that.
But what I think is wonderful about writing young adult fiction is that, maybe we didn't have those experiences or didn't get that knowledge, but teenagers today do have that knowledge and access to it, and our characters can benefit from it and can be that bit more confident and well-rounded because we can imbue them with that knowledge and that acceptance and that self-love, which I just think is wonderful. There's so many things about Michael that reflect me, but so many things in the Black Flamingo that I didn't do in my teens that I would have loved to have that kind of confidence and that kind of support and that kind of access to information and role models. But I get to give it to my fictional character, which is just so joyous for me. And it's the book, I wish I had as a teenager, but now other teenagers have that, which is great.
Oh, yeah. I feel like this panel could have been called like Why Black Literature is so much better now than the author's life when they were young.
Well,
I love
an honor,
that
right?
about that.
That long. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna just add to Dean's point about imbuing our characters with the things that we didn't have. Our character Amal is a 2020 or 2021 version of 1989 Yusef. And one of the reasons why I wanted to collaborate with Yusef was because of the type of 16-year-old that he was. I met him in college, and we were both in our early 20s, and he was not yet exonerated from the crime that he was falsely accused of. And that 20-something-year-old is the same that I met back then is the same person that you see here, despite not being exonerated, despite still being on probation and having to falsely register as a sex offender. So I was so curious and fascinated by the fact that Yusef was an incredibly woke teen. We didn't say woke back then, but we said conscious, right?
Yeah.
Really conscious. And this is the type of, I wasn't that teen because I didn't have that home life. I didn't have my parents telling me about this. I was Haitian. I didn't even know about the Haitian Revolution. But it wasn't until college that we were inundated with this sort of Afrocentric Pan-Africanist ideology that we got it like 1,000% from our professors. And this is a lot of the teens today. And we wanted to write about a teen who understands the school to prison pipeline, who understands that loophole in the 13th Amendment without having it learned, without having had learned it in school. So there is a conscious kid that exists out there, several conscious kids who are getting the information not from schools, but their own reading and talking to other young people, because this is the kind of New York City that we grew up in. The teenagers were like reading thick books and highlighting and writing in the margins, and you had to come with that sort of information because you were writing rhymes and you were doing spoken word poetry, and you had to have a certain level of intellectual prowess in order to have small talk with the people around you. So this is the character that we wrote. And like Dean said, we imbue those characteristics into the characters in the way that we didn't have them as children. But you did, Yusef. You were a woke kid.
I want to just echo something too that was spoken about just briefly. And it was what Dr. John Henrik Clarke said. I think, when he said that to begin a people's history with slavery makes everything else look like progress, it does such a disservice. And I think that that's where we see ourselves climbing out of, giving our characters the life that we want them to have in terms of being able to have those tools, right? Because everything, like I said, everything came from us. And when we do a disservice, I believe, when we teach otherwise, because then you have a whole population that believe that they are born a mistake. And if they believe that, if they hold that, as a truth for themselves, then they begin to move throughout their lives like mistakes. And the truth of the matter is that being born on purpose, being part of the greater construct, being a person who realizes that I can plug in at any time, I could reach into that greatness, I can tap into mitochondrial DNA in a way that is impactful and in a way that leads me towards understanding that everything that I'm doing matters, everything that I'm doing counts, right? And I think that that's part of that beauty. That's part of it all.
I would say also that is about possibility and understanding, not necessarily that you are born a mistake, but that you're born with a chance, with opportunity to be who you want to be. Whereas, I think often Black children are told, that they're born and they're just in for a life of being misunderstood and being destitute and, facing discrimination and not achieving the peaks of success that they can dream up for themselves. So I think part of that also is just knowing that you have a chance to be whomever you want to be. And I think that's something that we take for granted a lot. Just, that small thing that like, oh, you can listen to whatever you want to. You can wear whatever you want. You can say stuff and, you also can make it. My character is suicidal and a big part is just like believing that you have something to live for.
There's so much power in that.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much power in that.
Oh yeah. Zoomers too. Like anytime I read, what teens today are like writing on Twitter and stuff, I almost have to stop and be like, oh, this isn't real. Like they're way too with it. And then I'm like, no, but that's what's so cool. Like I didn't have any of this language, just the fact that teens today can like describe what I was experiencing when I was young, and I just didn't have words for, privilege, microaggression, woke, all that. I'm like, this feels so inaccurate to me, but it really is their truth. And like, it's so great to have authors like you all who recognize that, we can see ourselves in our characters, but also like they're living in a world where thankfully they have a little more, access to being Black. But yeah, there's still few and far between the books that, like Morgan was saying, like, oh, it turns out that like, Rosa Parks didn't just randomly wake up one day and decide to not give up her seat.
Wasn't
Like,
just tired.
That was organizing, that was planning. Like,
we really boiled it down there to like, tired? Okay, that's what we're calling it these days.
Right?
Oh,
I just learned that the Ain't I a Woman speech was like written by a white woman, and that the actual, Sojourner Truth actually like spoke Dutch more than English, I guess. And her original speech was, "May I speak for a moment?" And a white woman was like, "Ain't I a woman?" Sounds more Black.
We love to rewrite. That's why we're here.
Right. Speaking of performance, like she didn't even try to perform, and someone put that performance on her. Like,
I wanna, to your earlier point about performance, there's something I wanted to say I didn't get to say about being an author in the world during these times, right? Times with a capital T. And I've purposely stepped back from the stage, that performance stage. And I value the work of people who are vocal and speaking truth to power in a myriad of ways. But for me, it felt performative because that's not who I am at my core. And right now, I just want to retreat and be an artist. And this is part of us writing Punching the Air, that it's less about the prison industrial complex, less about a crime or courtroom drama. It's about an artist contending with himself in the same way that Yusef contended with himself through his art. So since we're making this a round table, I want to ask my co-panelists what it means to be an artist today. Are you more vocal in the world, or are you retreating into yourself to dig deeper? And I remember seeing some meme about right now, instead of going wide, you go deep. And I personally am going deep and not wanting to perform. I'm not on social media as much. I'm trying to look for depth in order to find that healing thing that will do something. It's going to do something for me and do for my readers. And where are you all? Are you out there like, ta-da, listen to me, or like, no, listen to my soul? However you define it.
Yeah, I think I wake up each morning and I'm like, do I want to go deep or do I want to tweet? Like, and so I kind of have to see what I feel like doing on that day. I haven't made a rule for myself that like I'm just gonna stick to my like work in progress and write this novel that I'm working on now. Sometimes I do want to have a kind of rapid response to stuff. Sometimes I do want to kind of get on a Zoom with a group of people and like talk about it, in that way rather than talking about it in the open forums that we have. And sometimes, I've got the privilege of being a poet, so I can write individual poems that kind of express how I feel, and then I can put them out. I don't have to wait, to finish a whole novel before I can express myself. So I can do it in individual poems, or I can, weave things into the novel that I'm writing right now, or, work on something short form, like a short story or something. But yeah, sometimes I get on Twitter. Sometimes I delete that later as well.
Yeah, I find that it's so important to be able to take space. Yeah, there's importance to be able to realize that the world is not social media, and having that kind of privacy for yourself, because what I found is that we often want to be able to turn to social media to be able to see what's going on in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to also participate and then share some of the things that we are diving into and trying to uncover and building for ourselves. And I think part of that time of being able to take it for yourself and just observe, understand, sit back, take notes is important. It gives you a certain level of authenticity, I think, that when you do show up with the power that you need right on time.
Yeah. Speaking of that, since you're all poets, but you all wrote novels, right? These aren't official, memoirs. But I was thinking how, it's a novel, but how interesting that the author is Morgan Parker and the character is Morgan Parker. Like,
I know.
and
like
then you have
like,
Yusef and Evie who have this like sort of ripped from the headlines. Like, so I'm curious, like, do you consider yourselves, like, do you consider your books fiction, or are they thinly veiled, ripped from the headlines? Like, what label do we put on your books?
Mine is fiction for sure.
Yeah.
I figured yours is kind of the easiest to, like, it goes in this box.
Fiction.
I mean, it's fiction, technically. I mean, there's obviously my life experiences. I went with my name just because I couldn't think of another one. And, as I was writing, I was like, this is probably not how I should be spending my time, changing her name back and forth. So, I just kind of went with it. And I think it's fun also for readers because I'm able to say, I too went through this. This is not just a grown-up talking to you being like, it's going to be okay. It's me saying, I didn't die, like I'm still here. So I kind of wanted to play into that. But it was very weird because, again, like we're saying, we're able to imbue the characters with the things that we didn't necessarily have. And, the timeline was a little bit off for me as well. So writing back into that Obama election, that was a little bit different. And it's a story that's kind of built that way and less around the me part of the character. The part that's me, I always say, like, it's the emotions are true, everything else is fake.
Yeah, it's very similar for me. I mean, the kind of climax of The Black Flamingo is Michael doing his first drag performance. And I did a drag performance myself, but I was 30 when I did that. And Michael is 19 when he does that. And I think if I'd done drag at 19, I'd have been on Drag Race for sure. But I think it was definitely, a big opening up for me of kind of what it means to be a man, what's possible for the way I present myself in the world, whether it's just those moments on stage or the rest of my life. But for Michael, that's the kind of climax of his story as you have it in the book. Who knows what he goes on to do next in his life. But it was lovely to create this empowered young person, because I think I started stepping into my power in my late 20s and early 30s. But it's lovely to kind of get to do that for a teenage character early on. And I think that is what teenagers need. They need that hope. They need that possibility. I knew I didn't want to write a tragedy. Like so many books I've read, especially about LGBT characters, are tragic. And I knew I wanted to write a story that would be considered a fairy tale, that would be considered, it has a happy ending. And, there are moments of jeopardy, but, he's going to be okay all the way through the book. And that was really important for me because I just wanted to contribute something really hopeful to the world.
I wanted to make sure my book was not a fairy tale, actually, at that point. And I fought with my editors, and I'm now fighting with, people. We're trying to make it into a movie, and we'll see, because they are like love stories. And that wasn't my experience. And I also find that, we tell teens the same stories over and over, and those stories don't happen to everyone, I read YA and feel like, oh no, that never happened to me. So I can't imagine, being a teenager where you're reading these happy endings over and over and over. And, you never get the guy. Is there something wrong with you? I really wanted to make sure that it was just kind of a regular story, and that nothing humongous happens, nothing terrible. Again, also, Black trauma is a little bit exploited sometimes, so I didn't want it to be that. I know I keep saying it's like about suicide and stuff, but it's a comedy, and I wanted it to be that. But I also, really wanted to buck against trying to wrap it up neatly, because it isn't. It's about life, it's challenges, and it's really about accepting the challenges with excitement instead of doom, I guess.
feel like I'm hearing myself talk. Like, yeah, there's reading for wish fulfillment and there's reading for affirmation, I think.
Yeah, and it's
some books that do one thing and some that do another.
It's been interesting too. I mean, there is such a resistance, we want to like tell the teens like everything is going to be great, and like we just really want to give them those happy stories, but no one dies, nothing really bad is going on, but there's also no prom kiss at the end, and that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that story, because at the end of the story she's still alive, and she wants to keep being alive. And that's all there is, everything else is bullshit,
Yeah, I'm wondering, Evie and Yusef, if you want to speak to that, because I don't want to like say what your experience is, Yusef, but I think your own story is kind of you didn't get what you deserved as a teenager, but you do have this, you did ultimately get, exonerated. And I mean, I feel like you deserve more, but so I'm wondering, like, you had a sort of delayed happy ending, I guess. But how do you, you think your book has one?
Yeah, when I look at Punching the Air, it's definitely a fictional story. But the good thing about what we did was that we were able to talk about the truths that we had experienced growing up in New York City. And so, I look at my story, really, the Central Park Jogger case story, and not necessarily the story of Amal, but I look at my story as a story where there is value when you get knocked down. Like, being knocked down doesn't mean that you have bad luck, as an example. Sometimes people look at it like that, right? But being knocked down, I think, is God or the creative forces creating an opportunity for you to become a resilient individual, for you to be part of the survival of the fittest, for you to be an outstanding person that has survived this, so to speak, tragedy in a way that magnifies the truth and also the injustice that's in the world. And so we come into the world with a certain amount of light that is already inside of us. And the world is always telling us, turn your light down, turn it down a little more, turn your voice down a little bit. But God gave us the human right for us to be able to turn our lights up, to turn our voices up. And so that in that truth, we get the opportunity to eradicate darkness. I look at my case as a fictionalized version in Punching the Air in such a way where the discovery is in finding out that the character's name means hope, and that hope is placed in prison. And hope oftentimes is in prison. It's not until you look at things from a different vantage point that you begin to see the value, that you can stop cursing the creator out and saying, oh, wow, this is just like the poem Footprints. I'm calling out, calling out, calling out. And then I realized it was you all along that was carrying me. Yes, this was horrible, it was tragic, but the blow was softened. I came back out of that experience, rebirthed into the world with all of my faculties intact, being able to tell the story from the inside out in a way that impacts future generations, right? And so we're talking in a way about how do we break generational curses? How do we seed plant? In the same way that, and I always describe it like this, the director, Ava DuVernay, had this T-shirt on once that said, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And so how powerful it was for the ancestors to have had the farsightedness to say, one day this too shall pass. And so I need to bury deep inside of self, in my deoxyribonucleic acid, the ability for my DNA to be passed back to the future generations to come so that they'll know exactly what to do. So the language is different today. The language is not necessarily just about reform, because reform becomes Band-Aids. But the language with the youth now is about abolition. It's about tearing down this system that never saw us as full human beings from the start. In the wording of the founding documents of this country, they said, we the people, and we weren't considered people in their eyes. And so here we are today, still dealing with the past that's still very much present, right? I live in Georgia. They pulled the Jim Crow thing the other day, locked up a woman who was knocking on her boss's door. I mean, imagine that. You're knocking on your boss's door, and the American people came to the Capitol and knocked down the door, pushed down the door. And then they got the opportunity to request for vegan or healthy choices for consumption. You know, it's just like, hey, man, listen, in my cell, I would have loved to have a California king bed. The juxtaposition is that we are in the two Americas, and we are really trying to expose that, not necessarily to destroy in the way that people think we are talking about, but in the context of what the 5%ers would say, build to or destroy to build, right? We are looking now at the kaleidoscope of the human family so that we can say we all have to be able to coexist in this space because we are all going to be each other's neighbors, and we've already been each other's neighbors.
So I don't want to miss out on some audience questions that we have. So now we go into the more Q&A structure. So our first question is from Catherine, and it's directed at Evie and Yusef. And she asks, how do you think gentrification creates tension between races and socioeconomic classes?
I'll take that, Yusef. So there's a moment in the book. We did not want Punching the Air to mimic Yusef's case. He was accused of a very violent crime, and we didn't want to go there for this YA novel. So what happens is there's an altercation between a white boy and a black boy. And we decided on that because in the same way that Yusef's trial and case was about race, it really was, we wanted to make this incident about race as well. And we were pulling from the incidences that happened in our childhood in New York City. A few months after the Central Park jogger case, a young man by the name of Yusef Hawkins was killed in a white neighborhood in Brooklyn. And this news, you know, we don't learn about this in history books, of course, but he ventured out into a white, mostly Italian neighborhood, Bensonhurst, and he was shot just for being there. So this wasn't a case of gentrification. This was just about a boy crossing that invisible line. So what happens with gentrification is that two demographics are forced to contend with each other. And it's not in a very peaceful way because you have one group of people being pushed out and another group of people coming in. There is no way to really coexist peacefully because the resources are not the same. I was priced out of Brooklyn. And the way that happens is that you don't own your home. And when you do own your home, the taxes become so high, or you don't have the wherewithal to keep up with all the changes that are going on in your community. So sometimes it's not just about race, it is about socioeconomic status. The people coming in can afford the chai lattes that used to be in the Starbucks that used to be a bodega. So it's not just the people, it's landscapes that are coming into contact. It causes friction. There's no equity. Nobody's sharing really. And I think the new people coming into communities think that they can bring their resources. They can help fund a mural or, gives the young people in the community something to do when they already had something to do. I have so much to say about that because I was born and raised in New York City, and I'm seeing how things have changed, and things are changing again because offices are leaving Manhattan. So now they're thinking of making them low income housing, and that's going to change the landscape even more. So yeah, there's tension. There's always tension when communities shift in that way, and it's a violent shift. It's not violence in the way that people are fighting, but it's violence in that the people who were there all along for decades can no longer afford it because the community is on the decline. There's no resources being poured into that community until another group of people come in.
Yeah, and add on to that, what you're saying about not living together, like kind of being pitted against each other in the same community. I think often the idea is, well, let's move in and wait for them to leave. So there is it's no integration, and that kind of gentrification. It really is a push out, and folks don't come in expecting to like meet their neighbors. They're just like, well, the coloreds will leave eventually, and then everyone will be drinking chai lattes. And it's, especially in Brooklyn, I feel that is the case. It's like, well, eventually that will kind of, and then Crown Heights will be Crown Heights as we like it, And I really find that is the scarier part, is that we're not thinking of neighborhoods as neighborhoods. We're thinking of it in this like territorial way that is, I just very scary to me, because it doesn't have to do with human beings. It just has to do with property and ownership. And it's really scary. And also, we have no generational, I mean, it's very rare. Like Brooklyn is actually really special in that way, because there are some Black folks who own homes, but that's so rare also. And to have that kind of generations of wealth behind you, it's not an even fight at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
I'm
what I was going to add to that.
We can get to other questions. Yusef, I do have a specific question for you from an audience member. Sorry, I know we could all talk for like 3 hours.
Sorry.
But I have a question from Sarah for Dean. So Michael talks in the book about how performance can be sometimes more authentic than reality. And so Sarah wants to know, do you agree? Is that kind of the case in your own life? Or like we've been talking about, is that maybe something you put into Michael because it wasn't true in your own life? Or,
I mean, I think there's a freedom in performance that you're not afforded sometimes in your regular life. Like when I do spoken word or slam poetry, people are going to listen to me for 3 to 5 minutes, and that's assured, and that's the rules of engagement. In the world, you so often get talked over, shouted over, patronized, but when you're on stage as a poet or as a drag performer or as, a singer, like you get this opportunity to be listened to. And yes, the kind of payoff or the exchange is that you're entertaining people in some way, but you can be putting in really strong messages. You can be talking about things we've been talking about today, gentrification or, injustice or the kind of the police. But if you do it in a way that kind of engages and somewhat entertains people, you can be educating and enlightening them as well. And I think that's the kind of privilege of being a performer, being able to get up on stage and make people listen to you means that you can say something that means something and that could have a positive impact. So that's why I think performance, there's lots of young people, there's lots of people with these ideas in their mind, and they haven't been empowered to, write them down or speak them out loud. But it doesn't mean they don't know and they're not thinking about these things every single day. That's why I love doing school workshops and giving young people the invitation to write their truths and write about the world as they see it, because they're absorbing all this stuff. They know about all this stuff. And if we let them tell it in their own words, there's so much wisdom there that we can learn from, And so I think, performance really allows, it's not necessarily more authenticity, but just a space to be heard. And I think so many of us need that.
Yeah, thank you. Morgan, you have a question from Chris, and Chris asks, your book has a playlist as the backdrop for a lot of scenes. Morgan mentions a lot of songs and albums. Were there any particular songs or playlists you listened to while writing the book?
So many. I mean, I went back to the stuff that I loved as a teenager. Fictional Morgan, like me, is like a little bit snobby and listens to music that predates her. So there is a lot of kind of 80s and 90s emo and noise rock and all of that stuff. I love Sonic Youth. I went back to Sunny Day Real Estate and the Get Up Kids and Fugazi, a lot of those punk bands. And I also went back specifically to 2008 so there's like very particular, I guess there was maybe the first Wolf Parade album. There's a Weezer album that comes out in the course of the book. So I went back to specifically to stuff that, oh, she mentions Good Charlotte, but she does not like them. So there was a lot of things that I made like a really long playlist for myself that I was listening to while I was writing. And yeah, it was really emotional. There was a lot of like, when I was in the depths of depression, like lots of Radiohead and Elliott Smith, but then there were scenes where I'm like, you know, moshing with my friends, and there's some more punk music there. It was fun, but one thing that I did listen to, and I think I mentioned it in the book, I had this playlist that I made for myself in high school that was like all my like emotional songs called Cellar Door, and I listened to that a lot. It was, what's on there? Elliott Smith, there's some Belle and Sebastian, lots of stuff like that. It was fun, but I was happy to like not listen to pop punk when I finished the book.
2008.
I know.
So Yusef, Dylan has a question specifically for you. It's a big one. Where do you think you would be in your life if you hadn't been wrongfully accused at such a young age? And how did this shape your life? I'm sure you can answer that in like 10 seconds.
Wow. So, what I want to say is, consider this. If you change anything in your past, the ripple in your future changes. And so if I look at the Central Park jogging case, I was kind of getting to this a little bit earlier. When I look at it and I say, wow, this is a love story between God and his people. It's a story of a criminal system of injustice placed on trial in order to produce a miracle in modern time. It's a story of how a people can be brought low only to rise because the truth can never stay buried. And it's also a story of a people buried alive and forgotten. The system forgot we were seeds. And instead of a social death, we get to emerge like the phoenix from the ashes, because as they built the fire to consume us, they forgot the owner of the heat. So what I want, I think wrapped in that question is also the reality of, if I had the opportunity to go back and change anything, would I? And the truth of the matter is that I wouldn't change anything. I remember listening to Oprah Winfrey, who was asked the question, what would she tell her younger self? And she said, knowing what she knows now, she would tell her younger self to strap in and enjoy the ride.
Wow. I could never answer that question so succinctly. That's beautiful. And I know this is also a rough question to give you all, very few moments to answer. But Senta, I think, has a wonderful ending question, even if it's maybe a bit hard to answer. And that's, what is the biggest thing you hope readers will take away from your books? I know you probably all hope for more than one thing, but what is one of those things, maybe? And let's start with Dean. I'm just looking at the order of people on the screen.
I think I'd like readers to take away, the possibility of a happy ending. It's not guaranteed for us, but I think, with perseverance and with the support of kind of family, friends, or, found family, because I think Michael has both his mom and his kind of family, but also the drag family that he finds when he starts doing drag. And I think, family isn't one thing. And you are not one thing. He goes through many transformations through the book, and he's always Michael at the core. And I think we're allowed to try on different outfits, different identities, until we find what fits.
Morgan?
Hang in there and go to therapy if you need it, and take pills if you need it. And that's okay. And that's good. And we need you, and stay here. Just that, basically.
Yeah, Evie?
I think, as I said before, this is a book about an artist, and we kind of wrap it up not so neatly in the end, but the moment of revelation for our character is that he still has the power of art. He still has the ability to create. And that's what we want our readers to get when they turn to that last page, that their ability to create something out of nothing is their greatest superpower in this world.
Yusef, do you want to add on to that?
Nice, nice, nice. The only thing I will say is that, you know, what I want readers to get is that you were born on purpose and with a purpose. There is no mistake in your thoughts, in your ideas, in what you value. And when you realize that you were born on purpose and with a purpose, I need you to begin to be able to move in that purpose the same way that Dr. King said in his speech, when he said, when you find your purpose in life, do it as if God himself called you to do it at this very moment. And instead of giving us a grand idea of what that could be, he said, if your purpose in life is to be a street sweeper, sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep the streets like Beethoven composed music, like Leoton Price sang before the opera. So in that excellence of becoming who you need to become, I think the value is being able to find value in the valley, wherever you are, and make something out of it. Because you're there for a reason and on purpose. And once you figure it out, you can illuminate the darkness in that space and shine your light on the world.
Wow, I feel like I'm inspired and I'm not even the teen reader. But thank you so much. I know I would love to keep talking to you. And I think, listeners would love to stay with you, but we have a time limit. So thank you so much, Dean Atta, Morgan Parker, Zoboi, and Yusef Salaam. And to everyone listening in today, thank you for coming. Don't forget to support local bookstores. You can buy all of these authors' books at Once Upon a Time bookstore to get a signed book plate as well. And enjoy the rest of the book festival. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
That was some great questions. Thank you, Dean, Morgan, Yusef.
Hey, thank you all.
Thank you, LA Times Book Fest.
Yes, yes.
Take care.